Right, good morning everybody and welcome to the January meeting of the Combined Authorities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Thank you very much indeed to members and officers attending today, and I've just done a tally up of the numbers and we are quorate. I'm going to ask for apologies in a minute and then I'm going to ask the officers to conduct a roll call of those present. But before I do so, I'd just like to welcome back Councillor Miscandlon after a short absence from this committee. He has made a surprise and welcome return and he is replacing Councillor Mason, who has stood down from this committee. The new substitute from Fenland District Council to substitute for Councillor Miscandlon should he need to be absent is Councillor Kim French, who I think we've not yet had the pleasure of meeting. So welcome back, Councillor Miscandlon. Officers, can I ask for apologies for absence, please?
Heard Councillor Miscandlon said that we have had apologies from Councillor Connor. Okay.
Thank you very much. I also believe that Councillor Gehring will be late to the meeting, but will be coming. That's that then. So would you like to do a roll call then, please, members present? Thank you.
If members would like to say yes or present when I call their name. Councillor Jordan.
Present.
Councillor Corney. Councillor Sharp.
Present.
Councillor Dupre.
Present.
Councillor Fain.
Present.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Present.
Councillor Hay. Councillor Miscandlon.
Present.
Councillor Gehring. Councillor Davey.
Present.
Councillor Scott.
Present.
Councillor Coles.
Present.
Councillor Murphy.
Present.
Thank you, everybody. Can you assure us, Anne, that we are indeed quorate?
We are quorate.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Next item then is declarations of interest. Does anybody have any interests that they need to declare in any of the items on the agenda for this morning? I don't see any expressions of such nature. There's no hands up, so thank you very much indeed. Minutes of the previous meeting then we turn to, which was our December meeting. Are we content that they are an accurate record? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, I see no dissent on that. Just to pick up one item, which was an action where on minute 6.5.
Lorna, can I declare that I would be unable to vote on that minutes approval because I wasn't a member of the committee at that time.
Indeed. Thank you for confirming that, Councillor Miscandlon. Then if I can just come to one outstanding action on the minutes there, 6.5. The Chief Finance Officer agreed to have a conversation with the chair of the CAM Task and Finish Group and that a note would be provided for members. Councillor Davey, as you're the said chair, are you able to update us on what's happened on that?
Yeah, we've had some difficulties finding a date, but we've got one for tomorrow morning. So I'll be meeting up with John then and we'll report back accordingly, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed for that. So if there's no other contributions to that, we can move on then to the next item, which is public questions. And I'm advised that there are none. Is that correct, Anne?
None received, Chair.
None received. Thank you. So our next item then is item 5, which is our third and final go at the Combined Authorities budget and medium-term financial plan. This is an item simply to receive the comments from the public consultation and to receive the updates to the budget, medium-term financial plan and capital programme. And we have with us, who I see has just appeared, welcome to John Alsop, his third presentation in as many months to us. So thank you very much indeed for coming, John. And is there anything you would like to say in introducing this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just briefly introduce the paper. if I may. So as you say, this is the third of 3 papers that's been brought to the committee during the course of the budget setting exercise. The first one was to go through the principles and the process. The second was as part of the consultation, as you'd be aware that the committee is a specified consultee. And then this third one is to receive the results of the consultation exercise. Following, obviously, the draft budget for consultation was approved by the board on the 25th of November. Since then, the communications team published the consultation document on the website, and they also directly contacted over 4,000 businesses and other local stakeholders and invited feedback through social media. I think the responses were better than last year, and from the analytical review of the data that we can provide, we've got access to. So the email campaign resulted in over 2,000 emails that were opened and 193 click-throughs to the document itself. And the social media campaign also resulted in 47 clicks through to the consultation document. So we received 9 formal responses by the deadline date, and then we received one further response from one of the officers of one of the constituent councils, which actually happened to be probably the most comprehensive response that we received. So there was one from a member of the another constituent council was asking about a confirmation that there wouldn't be a council tax precept, which we've confirmed that there wouldn't be. There are a number from parish councils and from members of the public. One asking for assurances that the subsidised bus services would continue once the combined authority takes a responsibility for those, which has been confirmed. There was one about the lack of financial support for A47 improvements. But the point from the response from that from officers is that actually the combined authority's role in that is as a project promoter, and that the funding would come from Highways England. There was a comment about the mayor's budget, but as you may be aware, the mayor's budget follows separate approval routes, so is not actually part of the consultation process itself. And there was also support for the dualling of the A10 and for improvements to the A141. In terms of the more recent response that we got from one of the constituent councils, there were a number of clarification questions. So there was a comment about the amount of staffing costs and how much of that was recharged directly to projects and to the subsidiary organisations. So provided some clarification on that. There was also a question on level of inflation on staffing. Just before Christmas, we had a meeting with all of the finance officers from across the public sector organisations. And generally speaking, most of the constituent councils were starting to prepare their budgets on an assumption of between 2 and 2.5%. You may be aware that whilst there was a notification from the central government on a public sector freeze, that doesn't apply necessarily to local authorities. We're subject to separate negotiations. But indeed, police and fire are planning to keep their cost of living increase to 0%. There was a question on Alconbury wheeled receipts and the forecast for those. And the response to that, I think that refers to the 30% commitment that the combined authority have inherited from the LEP. in terms of funding 30% of the combined authorities receipts towards the A14 upgrade works. And again, the response to that is it's 30% of the total that the combined authority receive. So there should not be an exposure to that if those receipts were not forthcoming, although they are forecasted to do so. There was a comment about climate change, and again, that was not directly relevant to the budget, although we have provided a response to that. There was a question about the assumptions on recycling of housing, and again, as part of the £40 million revolving fund, that is expected to continue, and that's been reflected in the medium-term financial plan. There's a question on the tutelary implications, so that as a reference to the transfer of the transport responsibilities back to the combined authority. So there will be some transfer of staff from Cambridge County Council and Peterborough City Council. There was a question about revenue budgets and those looking at whether or not they will be sufficient to be able to provide for all the revenue expenditure that we have got in the MTFP. Within the consultation document, it does show that over the course of the MTFP period, actually the revenue balances are expected to increase, which should give us some flexibility there. And also we have been informed that we will be in receipt of an additional £1 million of mayoral capacity funding during the course of next year. Again, a question on the provision that we've made for servicing debt, and whether that has been adjusted to reflect changes in PWLB rates, and yes, it has. But just to confirm that this is a provision, and currently there is no expectation or that we will have a borrowing requirement at this stage. There are a number of specific questions, again, from the relating to that council, and those are subject to ongoing discussions. And actually, the vast majority of the more capital nature of those are already included within the MTFP. So all of the responses were fed back to the leaders as part of the leader strategy meeting on the 13th of January. And the conclusion from that was that leaders were not proposing to make any amendments to the budget or the MTFP. So the question to the committee, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, are there any other comments they may wish to make to the board in light of the consultation responses received? And obviously happy to take any further questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, John. And just for completeness, there are a number of updates to the draft budget, but they aren't in any way related to the consultation responses. And they are predominantly reprofiling of capital projects and the transport levy with a net nil effect. Is that correct?
That's right, yes. So the original budget was based on the situation as it was back in October. And since then, obviously, the board has made some changes which do affect the MTFP. But as you say, it's all to do with really to do with profiling of the existing budgets.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, John. Does anybody have any questions they would like to ask John or comments they would like to make? I see Councillor Murphy's hand. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm just wondering on profiling of existing budgets. There's a few issues on future transport budgets. The existing budget for housing, we will get a chance to discuss this further later, includes a sum of £45 million, which at the end of January, the Combined Authority Board didn't seem to be sure when it was profiling that. Have they now considered that? And is that now in the medium-term financial plan for this year or for next year? That's the £45 million that that something is in jeopardy, something is not.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Yes, I know that the director will be feeding back on the housing programme later in the agenda. The MTFP is based on the assumption that we will receive that £45 million, so it is reflected in the MTFP at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from anybody else?
Just for clarity, that profile is that £45 million is in the next 3 months, yeah?
Well, it's making the assumption that that £45 million will be received by the combined authority. So the expenditure lines reflect that in the lifetime of the MTFP.
Is that by the end of this financial year?
Well, we're making the assumption that those funds will be available
in the next 3 months. Thank you.
Well, yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Yes, just to follow up, if I may. Thanks, John, for a very clear recitation. But just on the 45 million, what then is the foundation for the assumption that the money's coming? Because if it's in your calculations, then it has to be more than just a mere assumption or will-o'-the-wisp, doesn't it? So there must be some solid basis upon which that assumption's being made. So perhaps you'd be able to tell us what is the solid basis on which that assumption's being made. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, well, I mean, the deal, the devolution deal that was struck at the beginning of the lifetime of the combined authority was based on that assumption. So we had as you'll be aware, £170 million earmarked for the housing programme. And we haven't changed those assumptions yet. We are still working on the words of the deal as it was agreed at the outset. So there's nothing at this stage to make us think that isn't an appropriate assumption to make.
I understand. Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? I don't see any other hands. I've got a couple of questions of my own. If I'll take those now then. John, looking at 2.8 and the proposed responses from the combined authority to the points made, the first one on staffing costs, the response seems to suggest that if there are £2 million of the 5.4 million staffing budget recharged to other projects or externally, that leaves 3.4 million of staffing costs every year, which are basically central costs to the authority. Is that a correct assumption?
That's right. So those will be covered by revenue gain share. Right.
Okay. Thank you. The second question is about the Alconbury Weald receipts. The question, the consultation comment suggests that they are required to support other projects, and the proposed answer covers the 30% for the A14 upgrade contribution, but it doesn't cover anything else that I can see. So what else are those funds required for, those receipts required for? And what happens if, as may happen, that the receipts are less than predicted?
So actually, in terms of, it's probably misleading in terms of the consultation. I think when the question was originally put to us, it was more in terms of it was more directed towards the kind of the capital areas, so the A14 upgrade works. Yes, so the rest of the result, the LEP receipts will be used for other things. I can provide you. It's probably easier if I provide you with a breakdown of what those are, if that would help.
That would be very helpful, along with any comments on what happens to anything that is expecting those receipts if they are less than is expected. What the
Yes,
impact is
I'll
on
come back to you on those questions if that's all right. Thank you.
would be a helpful note. I think those are the only questions that I have, and unless anybody has come up with any additional questions while I've been raising my questions, then I think we're done on that. So I think we're asked to note the responses and updates. I think we've done that. So thank you very much indeed, John, and thank you very much, members, for your questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so we're then going to move on now to the Director of Housing. We will have with us Roger Thompson, who is just in the process of joining us, I see. So we have some questions for Roger. Good morning, Roger. I think you're still on mute.
Sorry,
Yep.
good morning, ONS members. And just in case I drop off, my apologies, I've got an unstable internet line this morning, so if I do dip in and out, that will be why, and I do apologise in advance in case that happens.
Thank you very much, Roger. And I'm slightly concerned about mine, so we'll just see how it goes, shall we? Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Is there anything that you would like briefly to update us on before we go into the questions that I've submitted in advance and any other questions that members may have for you? Is there anything you just wanted briefly to say by way of introduction?
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. In a way, I don't think so. I think let's get into the reports and the questions, and that will then bring, I think, the items and issues out.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, if I start with the questions that I've raised in advance, and you've provided written responses, for which many thanks. So this may sound a bit like a reading out loud exercise, but we'll go with it because it's for the public record. My first question was on the £45 million of withheld funding. At the meeting of the Housing and Communities Committee on the 11th of January, we asked about that withholding by the government of nearly half the £100 million housing fund. We were told the combined authority still hadn't received a response. So I was asking, was there any update? What is the reason for the withholding? What has been the impact of the uncertainty on delivery of the 100 million housing project? And what will be the impact on delivery if the £45 million is not provided? It's been reported that the combined authority still expects all projects for which grant agreements are being held back to go ahead on their original timetable and without delays. How will it achieve that, and how realistic is that?
Thank you. Okay, so a little bit repetitive, but I'll just read the response and then we can discuss as necessary later. Although we've been chasing for a response from MHCLG as part of the review process, at the time of this meeting, we've still not heard about the answer. This item remains a risk, and a significant risk. MHCLG advised that the longer process is due to COVID pressures at their end, and we believe that in connection with the reasoning behind withholding of the money, that MHCLG wanted to see more progress on some of the programme delivery, I think particularly the starts on site numbers, before approving the release of further funding. We continue to look at and assess the potential implications of the delay, dependent upon how long we have to wait for a decision. Although we're looking for the funding to be released and therefore the full programme will be funded, which will enable full delivery, we have been advised by MHCLG that while they are working hard to get a ministerial decision on the next steps for our housing programme, they have not been able to give us the quick decision and reassurance that we were seeking. They couldn't advise when the decision will come or what it will be in relation to the outstanding funding. If the 45 million is not provided at all, we will obviously only have funding to deliver 55% of the originally intended programme.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much indeed for that. When we met the mayor in December, we were told that the delay was due to the COVID pandemic and the additional workload that ministers had in Whitehall. Your answer suggests that there's an issue about progress of delivery. So is that more of an issue than what we were told by the mayor in December as COVID and pressure in Whitehall?
I mean, the main response that we're getting from and what I'm hearing from government is that it is the COVID pressure. The reference I make to additional programme delivery was on some of the previous reviews, because we've gone through 3 sets of review processes on this current round, which started in September 19, had a further review which went through a period in February, March 19, and it was when we were making inquiries, I think after the February, March 19, that they deferred their decision to a September 20 review, and and part of the discussion at that point and the reference to September 20 was that they wanted to see a little more progress in that programme delivery. Obviously, since we've now got into the September 20 review process, we really seem to have got bogged down with this sort of process issue and COVID and issues that are delaying around that.
Right. Okay. But you feel you've made sufficient delivery progress to warrant release of the money?
Yeah, we have a programme that's there to be delivered. I think if you read the reports that are attached to the meeting, there's a clear plan there. We have 1,800 units approved and in a live programme ready to go. We are seeing some increasing numbers of starts on site. We've had 3 schemes start on site since the beginning of January, and we obviously want to continue to be able to deliver that and get the additional housing that we know people in our area desperately need.
Right. Okay. My second question, and I've got 4 and I'll whip through them as quickly as possible, was about the programme end date, which continues to be a source of some apparent disagreement as to whether the programme ends in March 2021, 2 months' time, or March 2022. At the meeting of the Housing and Communities Committee, we were told that that remains a risk. But when the mayor attended our meeting in December, a month earlier, he said that the closing date was definitely 2022 and there'd been an error made by civil servants in London and that the issue should be rectified soon. So is there an update on that? Because we're now only weeks from what could potentially be the end of the programme. And if not, and the end date was definitely 2022, as the mayor told us on the 14th of December, why is it still a risk a month on from that?
So our opinion is that the closing date is and should be confirmed as 31st March 2022, as the affordable housing programme was always intended to be a 5-year programme from approval of the business case, which I think dates back to March 2017. We've made representations to this effect to MHCLG officers, and this is held up as part of the same decision-making process as the release of the outstanding funding.
Right, so it's not definitely 2022 as we were advised. It's still a matter of opinion.
I am waiting for confirmation of that as part of the outstanding issues with government. Yeah.
Okay. The 100k homes project, I asked how many people were on the waiting list, and your summary report for us this morning confirms that that's over 2,500 people. I also asked how many of them will get a 100k home in the next 3 years. How many will actually be installed in one of these 100k homes in 3 years' time by January 2024?
So just over 2,500 people have signed up to the 100k homes register. 100k homes are currently being completed at Fordham. There are 3 other development schemes under construction that have some 100k homes secured. Subsequent 100k home completions are likely to be in the second half of 2021, and more are in early stages of negotiation.
Right. So in 3 years' time, how many people are we going to see in these 100k homes with the keys in their hands?
That is a real crystal ball gazing exercise. It's dependent upon a variety of factors, including receipt of the additional monies from government, because that will help us to maintain the revolving fund going into the future through which some of these units are being delivered, and also the volume of opportunities that come to us. We are talking to various parties at the moment about future opportunities to get 100k homes on schemes, but if you're after a number, I can't give you a number. I don't think I can predict at the moment what that will be.
But is there an ambition in terms of 3 years' time? What's the vision for the number of homes and the number of families?
Well, I think the vision is as many as possible. We know there's a huge demand. There's 2,500 people that registered. Obviously we're not oblivious to that. We would like to supply as many as possible, and in 3 years' time, I couldn't tell you at the moment how many would be achievable in 3 years' time.
Right, not even a ballpark kind of scale. Are we talking about 20? Are we talking about 200? What are we
I think there's too many variables at the moment to even give you a good guide on scale at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And my final question, garden villages. Where is the mayor planning on building garden villages, and what process is he planning on using to do so?
So garden village locations will be dependent upon a variety of factors, including the final CAM routes, the availability of land in locations along those routes, and the likely prospects of securing all necessary consents. And obviously development control and planning will be key in that.
And how does the process for that dovetail into the processes that local authorities have for determining their own local plans and their own spatial strategies?
So in South Cambridgeshire, we know that some landowners have responded to the call for sites in South Cambridgeshire, and therefore they have responded through that process. And as local plans come up in other areas that may be affected by the CAM route, one imagines at the moment that is the process, the traditional process through which this will be going.
Right, because ultimately the location of garden villages will be a matter ultimately for the local authorities, no, under the planning regime?
With the current planning arrangements, yes, obviously to get a planning consent at the moment, you need to go through that process.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to throw this open to any other members with questions now, and I see Councillor Scott and then Councillor Miscandlin.
Yes, thank you very much, Roger, for that outline. In depth, that appreciated. I just wanted to come back to the 45 million because I'm a bit confused, I suppose, as to where the COVID-19 hold-up is. Is the COVID-19 hold-up in Whitehall, or is the COVID-19 hold-up in the building of houses, or in so as to assure Whitehall that the program here is proceeding as it was intended to do? Thanks.
Thank you. Obviously, the decision making that we're looking for from civil servants and ministers sits in Whitehall, and obviously government's had a lot of focus with resourcing around COVID and the pandemic and trying to ease us out of it with vaccine rollouts, etc. Now, I don't know the ins and outs, to be honest, of to what degree and where resources have gone, and therefore why there might be any delays at Whitehall. I'm not party to sort of knowledge of what's going on internally there. But the second part of your question, and I think we've flagged in our reporting, yes, there is a practical risk, if you like, with COVID in terms of the delivery of our programme, and this comes to everything to, are there any delays in the planning process that might be resulting from some of the COVID issues and resourcing? Are there issues with contractor delivery, different working practices on sites, people working remotely with potential sort of maybe some delay to procurement or decision making? So there's a whole host of factors there, I think, with COVID. Now, fortunately, up to this moment in time, we actually, I think, seem to have done quite well over the past 10 months with the programme in actually accelerating it, notwithstanding the fact that we've been encountering what I describe as COVID headwinds. And obviously, but looking ahead, that still remains a risk at this moment in time.
Thanks. If I could just follow up that my understanding is that COVID-19 is not impacting on construction, because if we look at the Cambridge situation, the houses are being constructed and that's outdoor work where the workers can social distance. So really the hold up would, if it's a hold up, by COVID-19 would appear to be more in Whitehall than in the actual construction end of the process, because, as I say, the Cambridge plan under the 70 million seems to be proceeding with due, with, what do we say? What's the expression? With
Due diligence.
Due diligence, yes, thanks so much. Yeah, thank you, Alex, thanks, yes. Yes, so it really must be more in Whitehall, if it's COVID anywhere at all, than in the construction end, at least, our end.
The construction industry has been very resilient with COVID. It's brought in some different working practices on site, because they do have to maintain social distancing issues, but that means they are having to adapt from maybe how traditionally on some sites they might work, and how they allocate their resources around the site, and therefore, if you like, the efficiency of the construction. And of course, if they have a case on site, then there suddenly becomes contact tracing and disruption and such like. So I think there is some practical impact that goes on, but it varies from site to site. But you're right, generally speaking, the construction industry has been very good and has managed to keep UK PLC moving. Yeah.
And just a final point, but if there had been a COVID case on site in the construction, the combined authority would know about it, wouldn't it? So as there's been no notification of that to housing, then we would assume there haven't been any COVID outbreaks on site with the construction.
If there was a significant incident, I think we would know about it. If there was an individual case on a site that we were funding, then we may not know about that, certainly not immediately, unless there was a more significant disruption impacting on the programme.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Miscandlin is next.
Thank you very much. Morning, Roger. One of the things is seen in all the reports, everything seems to be delayed by COVID, but we're informed by businesses and big businesses that have a lot of their staff working remotely, and you're a classic example, you're working remotely, and they're working very efficiently. So why is this COVID excuse of, oh, it's because of the pandemic, we're working remotely? There shouldn't be any delay, or very minimal delay, because of COVID working remotely. Businesses are saying that they're working quite efficiently remotely. Is there any reason why this is not being upheld by, certainly in Whitehall, that they're working remotely, and I fully accept they're working remotely, but they're not doing the job?
I can't really speculate on that, other than obviously there's a pool of central resources in government, and it may be that they're being focused in a slightly different way, is one viewpoint, but I can't really comment on that, I don't think.
I think it's something that needs to be looked at in terms of getting results and moving programs like we're trying to deal with here, moving them forward in a business-like manner, because at the moment it's not in a business-like manner, it's like in a delaying manner.
No, I agree. I'm as frustrated, I suspect, as maybe certain frustrations are coming from members of ONS here, that we haven't got the answers that we need, so we can focus on the job in hand. Yeah. So yes, I share that frustration. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gehring is next, followed by Councillor Murphy.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I hope you can hear me all right. Excellent. So let me ask the question that the Chair already asked, but slightly differently. Can you categorically exclude the reasons of transparency of decision-making and of governance that were mentioned in the media in the leaked letter from the minister in July? Because the minister said very clearly, if the letter as was leaked is correct, that this includes the delivery of the 100 million affordable housing program, on which the department wrote to your co-chief executives in June, outlining our differing view on the total additional starts on site delivered to date, and confirming that further evidence of progress would be required before the department could make further funding available. So are we really confident that the rest of the funding is forthcoming, or should we go back to the budget and say this is not as secure as we made it out because our progress on housing has not been as good?
I think the only comment I can make on that is that as time passes, it becomes obviously more, I think, more concerning, and it feels like that the risk to it, not clear the risk of the impact on the program as time passes seems to be increasing, and I suppose it does raise uncertainty around, we're hoping to get quick answers, and we're not getting those at the moment. Now they're saying there's COVID, but at this moment in time, I don't have the certainty of knowing that we have that money to apply to the program, that some of which we've already approved, subject to receiving that money.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Murphy and then Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you. I'd like to ask some questions about the programme. There's a few, but I'm going to try and get them all out now. So,
okay, I might need to have a quick.
We're told that we had a £170 million programme. 70 million was going to Cambridge City Housing Revenue Account to build council houses. 100 million to do other things. We've got a programme before us today that shows approved expenditure of that 100 million of £60 million over various years. There's one scheme in there for Wisbeach Road in March that's going to be delivered by June 2023 for several £1 million. So I know it doesn't work like this, but you've got £100 million programme that the combined authority believes was over 5 years. I don't know what the city council element was over, but assume it's over 5 years. Okay, that's not £20 million a year. That's programmed differently. We had a false start at the beginning because the regulations made the combined authority, because it wasn't the London authority, couldn't give money out to grants, that the Homes England had to do that. And then they changed the regulations and we managed to get some of that out. My premise is we're not actually building new affordable homes. We're paying for many that are already there, the Bretton Court in Peterborough, et cetera, et cetera. So we're catching up. We haven't only programmed 60 million. You're saying we have 100 million to spend by the end of next year. I'm questioning whether it's achievable. Sorry, they're not that opaque. And finally, on the 45 million pounds, that's part of our 5-year 100 million that we haven't received yet, though somebody earlier on said it was in the medium-term financial plan for this year, perhaps. If we haven't got it, where is that 45 million pounds? Presumably, there's a profile from the combined authority. We're going to spend 20 million pounds this year, 5 million every quarter to the ministry. They check it off and they've got their profile as well. Where is that 45 million pounds that we are told and promised by some people within the combined authority is there to be spent by the end of March this year? Where is the 45 million?
Okay, let me just try and sort of answer that, and then as a more general sort of approach. Now I think we'll come back to anything that's outstanding. The £100 million programme, the target, which we believe is 31st March 2022, is for starts on site by that date. There was always going to be a tail of expenditure, because obviously because a scheme starts on site, say in March 2022, it may not finish, if it's a complicated scheme, maybe for up to 24 months afterwards. And there'll be some phased payments to that scheme. Probably as it starts on site, there might be an interim payment when they're halfway through the scheme, and then there'll be a payment upon practical completion of the delivery of the additional affordable houses. So there was always going to be a cash flow that ran beyond the end of the programme in March 2022, and we would hold money to set off and to make the payments to the developers or registered providers who were delivering those additional houses. So the cash flow for it was always going to run beyond that period. if we're looking at our current position, we have 55 million in the bank already, and we're waiting this 45 million. Our current position, I think, if you read the report, is that I think we have 8 or 9 actually spent of the grant money already handed out to people, and we have a cash flow position on the revolving fund monies. But we're at the moment sort of quite well below the 55 million pounds that we've already received. We've looked at the amount of expenditure through the paper that went to the last housing committee that will be committed to enable us to support all the schemes that will start on site between now and the end of March this year, March 2021. And we're in a position where that's fine, and we can continue to commit, sign our grant agreements, get these starts on site in the next 2 or 3 months without any delay or impact upon what we're doing. The position after this March gets more complicated if we haven't got the money. I think there'll be a paper on this if there isn't a swift resolution to this issue that'll be going to the next housing committee to sort of articulate what that looks like and what any implications might be as a result of that. So hopefully, Councillor Murphy, I think that answers most of your questions. Is there anything that wasn't answered in that?
Councillor Murphy, did you have any? You're on mute, Councillor Murphy.
Thank you very much. That's pretty good. The profile is based upon start date, not defrayed expenditure. So that's when you get your money in. So we're in the bank earning interest. The only question that possibly wasn't tackled was my inference that a lot of these new homes are things that are actually planned anyway. Developers and housing associations were probably going to do them anyway. We haven't used the £100 million. I didn't expect all of it to bring about £100 million worth of new properties, new dwellings that people can rent. You'll see that a lot of the schemes recently have been shared ownership, which really is not appropriate.
I don't think that's correct, actually, Councillor Murphy. All of our schemes that come to a housing committee have a test of additionality applied to them. Some of our schemes recently have been 100% affordable housing schemes, and to be frank, clearly no one in our region can build a 100% affordable housing scheme if they're not getting some sort of support. So each scheme goes through that sort of test through committee, and I'm wholly confident that our additionality is all 100% appropriate for the schemes that are approved in the programme.
Thank you very much for your answer. I'm not sure whether you can say it's all 100% additionality. Clearly, when housing associations can borrow at next to nothing, they were going to be building probably 20 or 30% of these dwellings anyway, if not more.
I don't have anything to add. I disagree with you, I think so.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Chamberlain and then Councillor Miscandlin again.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions of detail, if I may. And if I might refer to point 731, and I'm looking now at Clark Maxwell Road. Can you confirm that the land transfer has now been completed? If I move on to 7.5.2, which is the Colville Road, if you look at the second sentence, it will provide and a total. I think there's a word there that's not required. 7.5.3, can you confirm the status of the planning application for L2 Orchard Park, please? 8.2, can you confirm that the Dundee Close Garage development has now been completed? I have to say that under point 11, I simply cannot understand the principle of not being able to determine whether the scheme ends in March 21 or 22. That seems to me the most extraordinary thing I've heard of. And finally, with reference to the Chair's questions on garden villages, you mentioned Cam Metro, but not East West Rail. So does East West Rail have a part to play? And can you indicate whether the combined authority has had any communication or discussion with Thacom regarding their announcement that they intend to develop an area southwest of Cambridge for up to 25,000 homes? Those are my questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, I think the detailed questions on the report were in reference to the 70 million Cambridge City programme. I don't know if Claire Flowers is on the in the waiting room somewhere. She has detailed knowledge of their programme.
It looks as if she may be from Sue Hall's nod.
But while Claire joins, because I think Claire can answer or at least respond on the questions on the Cambridge City programme specific sort of items. Just on the couple of questions at the end. Yes, obviously East West Rail and the Ops Cams corridor is on our radar. It seems to be a slightly different process in that it's being led by MHCLG. We're aware that they are making reference to maybe 2 or 3 settlements in our area that they're talking about potentially having some sort of development corporation structure to that, and at the moment that is sort of where that stands. Yes, there probably does need to be some sort of joining up between whatever prospects there may be for Cam Garden Villages and in due course whatever looks like maybe firming up through East West Rail. In this question about this development to the southwest of Cambridge, I haven't received or had any communication or received anything information wise about that development, so I have nothing I can say to you about that.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We now have Claire Flowers with us then. Welcome, Claire. There was some specific questions. Did you hear the questions from Councillor Chamberlain that were appertaining to your remit? And if so, are you able to give some response to Councillor Chamberlain on those points?
Yes, Chair, I'm happy to answer those questions.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Just context in relation to the questions that were asked. So this relates to the Cambridge City £70 million programme to deliver 500 new council homes. So the report sets out that we currently have 370 of our programme either on site or already completed. And so there are 3 schemes that we're working towards getting on site currently, 142. So one of those questions that you asked about was the site at Clark Maxwell Road, where we've got some affordable homes coming through. And we're still in the process of getting the land transfer from the University College that relates to that. The question about Colville Road Phase 3, this scheme isn't actually in the programme. We've got 542 in the programme. This is one of our reserve schemes. And that one's going through getting ready for a planning application currently, but it's not currently part of our programme. The same also applies for the scheme at L2 Orchard Park, but I can confirm that has been submitted for planning and we're waiting for a planning committee date for that, which we anticipate currently will be March. And in terms of Dundee Court, which is also not part of the 500 programme, but this report you've got here is the report that on our overall work to the Cambridge City Council Housing Scrutiny Committee, and that relates to some modular homes that have been gifted to us through the Hill Foundation 200 programme, and I can confirm those handed over and residents moved in just before Christmas. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just come back to the Colville Road one, 7.5.2? Oh, that wasn't a question about that. It was merely a statement that if you look at the second sentence, it doesn't make sense. The sentence reads, it will provide and a total of 47. I presume it means it will provide a total. There's just a word in there that's not required. Thank you.
Is that correct, Claire, or was that something?
That's correct, yes. Unfortunately, there is a typo. There's additional word of and there. It should just say it provide a total.
There was either a superfluous word or some words missing, I think. It would be useful to know which.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Thank you very much, Claire. That's fine. Is that that's done then? Councillor Miscandlon then.
Thank you very much, Claire. As you know from my previous sitting on this committee, I am a great advocate of modular homes. Has any progress been made in getting construction companies to produce modular homes? Because the pictures you've got on page 12 of the report shows some small modular homes. When the original programme was put forward, it was for full-size houses. Now, I know we've got a builder on this committee who comes from Ramsey and he's smiling at the moment. Has any progress been made in constructing or getting construction companies to build and forward modular homes, which will enable houses to be built very, very quickly on site, and therefore progress the delivery of houses to the members of the public in a more meaningful manner?
I think that's good for Roger. Yeah.
Claire, I don't know if you want to comment on the reference on modular homes in your Cambridge City programme, and then I'll maybe give a wider comment at all.
You're on mute, Claire.
Well, let me give the wider comment first, maybe. Then maybe
come back to Claire in a moment.
So, I mean, generally speaking, yes, obviously we are trying to encourage the use of modular construction, and when talking to the registered providers, you know, we are trying to push them in that direction. We have some schemes that we have approved in our grant program that do have some modular elements within them. I think one of the ones at March has or I think it's wholly a modular scheme. So we are trying to move things in that direction. But site to site, there are sort of sometimes site issues that make modular more challenging as a method of construction. And there's still, unfortunately, probably a little bit of suspicion, I think, around the industry around modular construction and the quality that you get. Now, I think the quality is very high and has improved significantly from, I think, some of the sort of early days where maybe there's some reputational sort of issues with it. But as a combined authority, yeah, absolutely, we'd love to see more modular construction across our area. Yes.
Yeah, I go back to the days of people prefabs. They were modular construction, and they went up very quickly. And some of them are now listed buildings because they are still here 70, 80 years after they were originally constructed. I can't see the reluctance. You say the registered deliverers of it. Well, can't we go outside the registered delivery and speak to some of these companies that would love to come here and build some modular homes within the Cambridgeshire area? Because we need homes and we need them to be constructed fast. And as you quite rightly said, they're off the scale in their conservation, in energy efficiency, and going forward, they will be here still in 50 years' time, which is what current houses are. So I can't see the problem. I think more effort needs to be put to these people to actually get these off the ground.
Okay, thank you. I think that was more a statement than a question. I'm not
Claire's
seeing.
Back on.
Oh, Claire's back on. Thank you, Claire. Yes, sorry, we had difficulties with you for a
yeah,
while.
sorry, Chair, I couldn't find the mouse to unmute myself. Yes, so we've developed these homes specifically for the homeless very quickly, been able to bring them to site from the factory with furniture in. So we've got a programme of 16 of those in the city at the moment, and looking for some more, and also in discussion with the supplier about how we can use this to deliver flats and houses as well as part of our future programme. The schemes that we've got on site at the moment through our existing programme, most of those will have some off-site elements, for example, bathroom pods and things, but they haven't got full houses as such that have been built off-site in a factory.
Okay, right. Thank you very much indeed for that, Claire, and thank you, Roger, as well. Thank you, members, for your questions. And we'll now let you get on with your other very important duties. So thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Thank you. Moving on then, have we got Councillor Bowden waiting for us? Our next item is to hear from the chair of the Housing and Communities Committee. Now, I would like, if possible, to conclude this within say 20 minutes, given the other items we have on our agenda. And I think it would be useful if we didn't simply use this opportunity to reiterate all the questions that we've just asked Roger and Claire, but there may well be issues arising from that we might wish to pursue. And I believe that Councillor Scott has got a specific question for Councillor Bowden that I'll probably start with. So I'm not seeing Councillor Bowden. Do we have Councillor Bowden with us?
He hasn't got his camera switched on.
Ah, we do. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Bowden, and thank you very much for joining us. We've just been in discussion with Roger Thompson and also with Claire Flowers about the progress of the schemes and some of the issues and uncertainties. Was there anything you wanted to say to us before we ask you some questions? I'm assuming that we've got about 20 minutes for this item. So was there anything you wanted to say to us in advance of us?
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Dupre, for the hint that I shouldn't go on for too long. I think one point which has been raised and some questioning came out from it was, why on earth can there be any doubt about whether the scheme should finish in March 2021 or March 2022? It seems like such a blatantly obvious question and should be absolutely clear to everyone. And in practice, what happened is the following. When the combined authority was actually set up and when our first monies were received, some monies which had been lying around in central government coffers were transferred from the previous financial year. So we received two lots of payment in the 2 lots of allocation in the first year. And we have, and quite reasonably, I believe we have, been assuming that the 5 years were from the start of the programme. They have gone back to before the existence of the combined authority and gone back to the beginning of the previous financial year in order to do the calculation of 5 years. Now, I think that everyone was signed up for the fact that it was a 5-year programme. I think there's no doubt about that. It's when the 5 years starts from. And it doesn't make a great deal of sense. And I can see Councillor Chamberlain shaking his head, and I can fully understand that because I shake my head about it regularly. But ultimately, I believe this is going to be sorted out and sorted out quickly, because if government actually wants the delivery of what it's asked for, then it will need to give us the 5 years that was promised us from the time that the programme started. So on the assumption, and some might say it's a big assumption, but on the assumption that government actually wants us to deliver what it's asked for, then I believe that we will come to a resolution on this, and we'll have to do so very quickly. Thank you, Councillor Dupre. I'll keep it short.
Thank you very much indeed. The suggestion from what you're saying before I throw it open is that it's not an error made by civil servants in London, but more of a question about when the time period starts from, and a difference of views on that, rather than an error by civil servants.
I think that when this whole programme was set up, there was a failure to be specific enough about what the 5 year, what date the 5 years started from. And I'm not looking to point fingers at civil servants. I'm just saying that it wasn't set up adequately clearly at the very beginning. And if it had been suggested that the 5 years started from a year before the mayor was elected and the combined authority was actually formed, then probably we would have had to say, sorry, we probably can't do it in 4 years.
Mm.
That question was never addressed at the time.
Okay, right. Thank you for that clarification. I'm going to go to Councillor Scott initially, because I believe you've had some correspondence with her and other members, and I wanted to give Councillor Scott the opportunity to raise that with you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre, and thank you, Councillor Bowden, for your email, which followed on from a question that I had put in the earlier meeting. Now, I just appreciate having received, we all do appreciate having received this clarification, but we need to follow up on it, if I may, because your email does at least suggest that there is a potential real risk that the 45 million won't come. So, and that will have a serious impact on the affordable homes provision by the combined authority. So if we could just come back and perhaps be a bit clearer as to exactly whether your thinking is that the 45 million will come or not. And one of the indicators of that would be, of course, whether it had been factored in to central government's budget somewhere, because if it's not in there, then it's not coming to the combined authority. But if it is in there, then that's a clear indicator that at least they've targeted that sum that will come to the combined authority if certain conditions, I expect, are met. But perhaps if you'd be able to clarify, Councillor Bowden. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. And first of all, I'll reiterate my apology to you that the answer I gave to a previous question that you asked at the Housing and Communities Committee was not as clear as it should have been. And in fact, it could be deemed to be quite misleading. And I was, to be quite honest, mortified when I realised that I'd included a sentence which really, especially if taken out of context, would have been wrong. So I do apologise for that. My thinking on it is very much as I've just mentioned, that if government wants the delivery of the programme, then they will pay for it. If they don't want the delivery of the programme, they won't pay for it. So far as whether the money is there, the money was put into the government's forward plan back in 2017. So the money had already been allocated on a forward basis. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of going through central government accounts and central government budgeting, but it is as opaque as you could possibly imagine. However, what I haven't heard is that that £45 million has been taken out of the government funding programme. So on that basis, I'm assuming it's still in. If it had been taken out, I'm sure we would have heard about it. So the money is still there in central government coffers. It just hasn't yet been paid over to us. And in terms of my expectation, I am still very confident that that money will be paid over and will be paid over quickly. Because if it's not paid over quickly, then the housing delivery programme that we've currently got will be partially at risk. And I don't believe that's what government actually wants.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Scott, you're on mute if you were responding to that.
Yes,
I'll do a follow-up.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yes, if I may just follow up, that in your email you did say that, of course, we'd have somebody coming in March to give a complete report, but would it be possible for an officer of the combined authority to return to the powers that be in Whitehall and to actually ask them where it is pinpointed in their budget? Because if it was in a forward budget back in 2017, although we might assume that if it were not there, the combined authority would have been told, a way to actually clarify that would be to go back and say, could you please indicate where it is in a budget somewhere, this 45 million? Because as you've said, Councillor Bowden, if it's there, then it will be coming. If it's not there, it won't. And somebody must know where it is. Thank you.
Government has said, or the MHCLG has said, that the money is currently being considered for release. So the money is there in the budget. They have got it available. It's just that they have not yet agreed to release the money which is there. I think it probably would be superfluous to ask for the question about whether it's in the budget. They have already accepted that it is there for release when they can get through their process of releasing it. And they have told us that they have been trying to expedite this with ministers, and the only excuse that they have given for not releasing it as of now, not making a decision as of now, is the COVID-related pressures. And as far as that's concerned, that was something which concerned Councillor Miscantlin, and I heard the question before quite reasonably. And looking at it from their point of view, my interpretation of their comment is that the MHCLG is so heavily concentrating on COVID-related items that other things which aren't COVID-related have been put to one side. And I've certainly experienced that, I have to say myself, with some other inquiries which have been made of MHCLG which haven't been COVID related. So my guess is they have actually been putting non-COVID related things to one side as they deal with the COVID emergency.
Sorry, this is actually the final point I'll make. In my view, housing actually is a part of COVID relief, because if people don't have proper housing, then they're susceptible to the COVID-19, to the virus. And therefore, I'd be putting forward an argument that this is a part of the COVID package in a sense, and that if the 45 million doesn't come through very quickly so that the housing can be built in on a proper schedule, then they're putting people at risk. Because as I say, if you don't have secure housing, then you're at risk. You're in the at-risk category in terms of COVID-19. But that's the final point I'll make. Thanks, Councillor Bowden. Thank you.
And Councillor Scott, I have to say that you're making the error of trying to apply logic to government bureaucracy, which is unfortunate. I understand exactly the point you're making. The point I was making is that whilst in the longer term, we're talking 2 years or maybe more before some of this housing is actually completed and lived in the longer term, you're obviously entirely correct. The COVID pressures I was talking about are the decisions which are being made by ministers and by officials on a day-to-day basis, sometimes on an hour-to-hour basis. And it's those pressures which I believe they are saying have taken their eye off this particular ball. But yes, your logic is entirely correct. It's just not the way government works, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Chamberlain and then Councillor Gehring.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to offer an apology to Councillor Bowden. I was not in any way shaking my head at his comments, merely at the incredulity that we could have a misunderstanding of the start date. And I would like to thank him for his responses and his hard work.
Okay.
Well, that's a very kind comment. Thank you, Councillor Chamberlain. I wasn't commenting on your shaking your head at that time. You were shaking your head earlier in the meeting when Roger Thompson was mentioning that particular point.
Yeah, it was incredible then as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gehring.
Yes, thank you very much, Chris, for shedding some light on this. Of course, I'm, slightly confused that a Conservative mayor can't talk to a Conservative minister in Whitehall, but that slight political point aside, has the combined authority categorically provided the evidence that the leaked letter from July required from the mayor in order to resolve the issues that the minister in his letter, first to the chief executives and then to the mayor himself, raised about the delivery of the homes? Because the letter said, confirming that further evidence of progress would be required before the department could make further funding available. So you're saying that evidence has been provided?
Well, my saying it wouldn't count for much, but that was what Roger Thompson was saying, that we have been in communication with MHCLG. There has been further progress so far as delivery is concerned. And in our opinion, sufficient has been shown both in terms of the progress which has been delivered and the pipeline that we've got for future potential delivery to ensure that by March 2022, more than 2,000 new affordable homes will have been started on site from the £100 million CPCA fund. So we've put that forward to central government, and we believe that still is completely the case. However, that is potentially going to be risked if the decision isn't made fairly soon, so far as the 45 million is concerned.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden, for your clarity in what's going on in what is very, very opaque. And I think your inference is if the combined authority had that £45 million, would be able to use that to tackle the housing issues. I'm just wondering two things. If there's anything the overview and scrutiny committee could do to help you with some of the wicked issues in housing. And I believe that there has to be a balance between homes that maybe were going to happen anyway and those that we can move along and all the new ones. And I'm just wondering what you think will happen as and when the £40 million that hasn't been allocated is available, what plans we've got over the next year or so to get some start dates on that. And how is the balance be going, not just between those things that are in the pipeline that can be built, but getting them built in the right places where they're needed perhaps more in one area than another area. Very, very difficult to balance all these overarching programme views. And is there any scope where local councils may have a housing revenue account for them to knock on the door of the committee and say, actually, we could build some council homes or emergency accommodation?
Well, there is a significant amount to unpack from that question, Councillor Murphy. And I find myself in a rather ironic position here, because about a third of you on this meeting today will remember that I was a member of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee up till just on 2 years ago. And when housing came up, the one thing I continued to press Roger Thompson on was the definition of additionality and whether homes which were being provided truly were additional. So it's quite ironic, Councillor Murphy, I think you were on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee at that time. I think it's quite ironic now that you should be asking me the same question that I was asking more than 2 years ago. And I think that we actually have had some answers to the questions that I was answering, in that our definitions weren't quite as rigorous as they should have been. And as a result, some of the units which might have been previously included, especially some of those in Mere Fen, in Northstowe, where we did have 540 in the list, and we don't anymore, but where we did have 540, I think the question was a reasonable one, and it still is now to some extent. So you're continuing to ask the question is a perfectly reasonable one, and that's a matter for negotiation between the CPCA and the MHCLG. And as with the 45 million, I'm hoping that we're going to get a resolution out of that as soon as we can. So far as what happens if we don't get that 45 million is concerned, I think that now that the potential for the pipeline to be threatened if we don't receive notification of this pretty quickly, it is essential that a plan B and possibly even a plan C is made available and put forward to the combined authority. And that will be done either or both through the communities and the Housing and Communities Committee, and or through the board itself, because some very fundamental decisions will need to be made, some prioritization will need to take place, some choices will need to happen about what we do fund and what we don't fund. And any suggestions which can be made concerning how we can manage, if we don't get that 45 million, to rescue some of the schemes which otherwise would have taken place, any suggestions which could be made by any member of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee would, I believe, be very helpfully received, very gratefully received by Roger Thompson, because he'll be the person responsible for putting together, both to the board and to the Housing and Communities Committee, how we will move forwards if the £45 million doesn't come pretty quickly.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd just like to quickly ask you, if I may, Councillor Bowden, a couple of additional questions before we close this item. The first one was that the report from Roger Thompson, which we have in front of us, itemised 3 risks, 2 of which we've discussed. The first one was the availability or not of the £45 million. The other was the COVID disruption to the programme. The third one, however, was pressure from providers' ability to seek funding from other sources, namely Homes England. And I wondered whether you could very briefly unpack that a little bit, because are we talking there about housing being delivered, affordable housing being delivered, but simply through other providers? How, in what respect is that a risk to you, and how do you propose to manage it?
Well, this is not just a prospective risk, this is something which has already happened. And that is where we have taken on board and approved a scheme, certainly one scheme, maybe even 2 schemes this has happened to, but certainly one to my knowledge, where we've taken on board a particular scheme, we've approved it for funding, and then they've come back to us and said, oh, we've now received funding available from Homes England, we'll be taking their funding instead of yours, thank you very much indeed, we won't need your money. So that does happen. Why they do that, I don't know, whether there was a funding element to it, whether there was a timing element to it, or whether there is something else to do with the relationship between the builders and the registered providers and Homes England. I just don't know the rationale behind it, but it already has happened, and it may happen again in the future. And if it does, the way to look at it, I feel, is it doesn't actually threaten the number of homes which is being built, merely which stream of funding is going to be used to build it. And I don't believe that that's going to be a major consideration I don't think it's going to impact significantly on the number of units which we will build and which we will approve, unless we don't get the 45 million. And if we don't get notification pretty quickly that the 45 million pounds is going to become available, then more builders, more registered providers may think, oh, let's just be on the safe side. Let's go to Homes England and get the money rather than waiting for the combined authority. So there is a reputational danger here to us, which may cause the exact problem that you mentioned to happen if the 45 million doesn't get resolved pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you. And your next meeting of the Housing and Communities Committee is on the 15th of March, I believe, the Ides of March. Is that too late for you to consider what happens if it's not resolved before then? Would you be looking at some kind of emergency meeting or other way of addressing the risks if things still aren't clear before then?
I asked in the last week for a process to be started of reports to be raised on this very issue. And it may be, depending upon what happens, and I have to say, I'm really hopeful that this is going to be resolved really quickly for various reasons, which I can't go into, which are confidential, but I'm really hopeful this is going to be resolved very quickly. But if it's not, then it is going to be necessary for the matter to be looked at more in terms of the options that we have available to us if the 45 million pounds doesn't ever materialise. And as such, I've asked for that report to start being produced. It may well be that it will need to go first before the board rather than going before the Housing and Communities Committee, just because of the fundamental seriousness of it and how large the number is. Because there will be a number of different options which are available to us in terms of coping if the 45 million doesn't materialise. But I can promise you that we're not going to drag our feet on this. And if the 45 million doesn't materialise, we'll be moving forward by one means or another to get the matter before a relevant committee, probably, quite possibly the board, as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Miscandlon, is that a legacy hand or is it a very quick point?
It's a very quick question. Good morning, Chris. In 2017, the budgets were originally laid out for the combined authority, and the 45 million was in that budget. So if that 45 million is no longer in the budget, whoever formulated the original costings needs to justify why that 45 million is no longer in the budget. Am I right?
I wouldn't point my finger in that direction, because at the time that was done, that was the agreement that the CPCA had with the MHCLG. The 45 million pounds was part of the 100 million pounds, which was agreed by both parties. So it was perfectly reasonable to include the whole 100 million pounds in our budget. Now it is the case that central government, or at least MHCLG, are reconsidering the releasing of that element of the 100 million pounds. But at the time that original budget was created, that is what they agreed.
So they would have to publicly justify why that 45 million is no longer there.
I would believe so, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, members, for your questions. Thank you very much, Councillor Bowden, for joining us and for answering our questions so fully. And thank you in particular for taking the time and trouble to revisit your former answer to Councillor Scott, which I think has been a very refreshing development and has certainly helped our understanding of matters. And so thank you very much indeed for that.
Thank you, Councillor Dufresne.
Thank you, everybody. So if we can then move on to our next item, which is to review the Combined Authority Board agenda for this coming Wednesday, the day after tomorrow. I'm just going to run through the items on this agenda, I think just in order, the substantive items at least, and ask whether anybody has any questions that they would like to suggest we ask at the board meeting on Wednesday. So I'm assuming no one, well, does anybody have any questions on the Combined Authorities forward plan that they would want to ask the board? Not seeing any enthusiasm for that. Then there is the change in membership of the Transport and Infrastructure Committee, but there's also a late report on the change of the remit of the Transport and Infrastructure Committee. Is there anything that anybody would like us to ask on that point? No. Oh, Councillor Davey.
Forgive me, I've muted myself. Yeah, I think clarity about the roles and remits there, because I think there could be a degree of confusion about where the responsibilities lie. So I think it would be helpful if we ask something around the change of the remit.
What in particular would you like us to ask? Are you're talking about confusion? Are you suggesting that we ask about the potential for confusion and duplication and how they intend to address that?
I'm aware that other places where decisions are being made aren't happy with the recommendations. So I think it only seems to make sense that we look at how the decision making rests with regards to the GCP in particular, bearing in mind the Mayor is now a member of that board. So I think it would be just a clarification, I think, Chair, if possible.
So would you like to frame a question for us? Because we need to agree the question rather than just the topic.
Oh, oh goodness me, you put me on the spot there. But I think something along the lines of about, oh gosh, can you give me a second?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, forgive me, I didn't expect that.
Sorry, I'll come back to it's just that we have to agree our questions, and I don't want on Wednesday to go and be asking a question that you wouldn't have wanted me to ask, because we can only move forward by agreement on this. And when I go on Wednesday, I go on behalf of this committee, not on my own.
I understand, and I apologise to the committee for not framing it in advance.
No, that's absolutely fine. You take a minute or two. Appointment of Combined Authority Returning Officer is the next item. And I thought we might want to ask a question. Well, I would certainly be interested to know. The report suggests that an election in May will be able to be run within the same budget envelope as was previously envisaged. There's been money put aside for this over the duration of the last 4 years. Bearing in mind the number of local authority chief executives who will be running elections, who have come forward and said, as has been recently covered in the press, that they do not believe they can run a COVID-safe, free and fair election in May, given the restrictions we are likely still to be facing by then. I wondered whether we wanted to ask whether the combined authority really is still confident about being able to run an election in such circumstances and about the effect on that budget envelope for the election. Is that a question that you would be happy for me to ask on your behalf? I'm not seeing any dissent at the moment. I'm seeing Councillor Davies' hand still up.
Oh, sorry.
I think is a legacy hand while he contemplates. Councillor Miscandlin.
Yeah, I think it's a perfectly valid question, because I've read those reports and there seems to be a considerable number of returning officers and monitoring officers throughout the country have expressed concern about a May election. Some suggesting it's being put back to September, October. I think that needs to be a perfectly valid question. What contingency plans have been put forward should that occur?
Okay, thank you. So if we're content to do that, then the question would be, as I have framed it, that given the concerns that have been expressed, how confident is the combined authority that it will be able to run a COVID secure election that is free and fair in May, and are they confident about the effect on the budget envelope of so doing? Yeah. Then we have the performance report. Is there anything we would like to ask about that? I'm inclined to ask a question about the £100 million housing scheme being on red on this report, and what the next steps are to address that. Is that, given that we've had a discussion here, is that a suitable question, or is it redundant in the circumstances? What do people think?
I think we should still raise it, and perhaps we should ask, can we send Councillor Bowden, when it's safe to do so, to go and meet with the Minister and sort it out?
Mm-hmm. Are we happy to ask
Yes, I agree.
What plans the combined authority has to deal with the fact that that flagship project is now on red. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a major issue, Chair. I think that's a very, very key point.
Okay, fine. Then we have the combined authority monitoring and evaluation framework. Does anybody have anything that they would wish to raise on that? I don't, but if other members do, speak now. No. Then we have the combined authority business plan and annual report. Are there any questions on that from anybody that they would like us to raise? Excuse me, I'm just going to plug in my computer because it's running out of battery. I don't see any hands. Does anybody want to raise anything on the business plan and annual report? I thought about raising something on carbon emissions because it talks about hammering carbon emissions down to zero, but I'm not entirely clear that there's an awful lot of detail in that about how that will be done, particularly with regards to construction and also with regards to transport. So I would like to ask, I'm aware that the Climate Commission is meeting, but the point is that that will not report in full for some time while there are still an awful lot of issues ongoing. So are you happy for me to ask something about how, in practical terms, the combined authority intends to, in its words, hammer carbon emissions down to zero? Yeah? Okay, I'm seeing no dissent on that.
No, fine.
Risk and change control, relationship between risk and change control. Anybody get excited about that? No questions on that? No, okay. Then we've got the budget monitor update report. So are there any questions on that? I suspect that there might be, perhaps, on, for example, on CAM. Councillor Davey, you're our go-to CAM person. Is there anything that you would want us to be asking on that? I see
I've got
your hand is
two
up.
questions here, which are slightly easier than my befuddled question about the Transport Authority, which I'll come back to the problem I've got about that later. But
Yep.
two questions specifically around the budget update are, can, under the Appendix 1 around delivery and strategy, which I know is detailed, but it's page 5 for those who are interested in can we confirm what stage the outline business case is regards to the CAM, and has the current budget of 1.425 million been spent? And if so, could we have a detailed copy? So that's the first question. And the second one relates to the One Cam company. In their budget, it would appear that the 6.846 million has been allocated, of which to date only 3 million has been spent. So the question is, what's happening to the remainder of the £4 million, bearing in mind there's only 2 months left in the financial year? So it's about clarity of how the One Cam company is operating.
Okay, are we happy to ask those questions? Yeah, I see nobody disagreeing with that. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Davey. The Mayor's budget is the next item on the agenda. Are there any questions about that anyone would like to ask? No. Then the budget and medium-term financial plan. I suspect there might also be some questions on that. I would hope so, at least. Perhaps again on the CAM. Is there anything on that anyone would like to ask?
I
Davey.
need to crack on again, Chair. Sorry, it's really about the future of the outline business case again. It seems to end in 2024.
Right.
I think it's what happens in thereafter, which would be helpful to understand.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Are we happy to ask that question? And are there any others anybody would like us to ask on that item? Not seeing anything at the moment. Okay, so we'll agree to ask that question. Then there's the transport levy. Any questions on that from anyone? Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, in a way, these are related to the issues you were teasing out a minute ago about bigger transport infrastructure plans and so on. So we may want to ask about the transport levy. Where's it going in the future? Just based upon what we've learned, the staff are now going to transfer after 3 years. The levy has remained the same in finances as it done since the beginning. At the beginning, the combined authority got given transport at the last minute and there was no consultation about it. But in the meantime, we've had Cam Metro, lots of other things. We've spent money on subsidising some bus routes, rural bus routes. We've talked about improving the bus service, but we've not done anything. And we spent millions that the government have given for transport to put bikes on roads for COVID, etc., etc. So I suppose the question is, does this simple figure about the transport levy actually reflect what's going on in reality and will be happening in future years?
Right, okay. Is that a question that people are happy to ask? Yeah, do we have some, that's your phrasing of it, is it?
I think the figures remained absolutely the same. Basically, we've passported money to and fro. Does the figure on the transport levy, does the report on the transport levy actually reflect in reality the sum of all the work that's been on transport over the last several years?
Right, okay.
If you look at other combined authorities, they're running integrated public transport systems. They're doing loads and loads and loads. I know we're Cambridgeshire, I know we're not Liverpool, but does this actually reflect what's going on and what will be going on?
So is it you're talking about the size of the levy? Does the size of the levy reflect the enormity of the task? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, Chair, I think that's it. I mean, you know, for £5 on the levy, you could provide free public transport to all school children and pensioners and rural people in the county.
Okay, are we happy to ask it in that, are we, and do you have a grip of that sufficient to be able to frame a question for us along those lines?
Yes, I think so, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Then we have the CAM update, which has been withdrawn, and I wanted to ask for an explanation on behalf of this committee of why the CAM update January 21 has been withdrawn. Are we content to ask that question? It seems to me to be fairly fundamental. Yeah, okay, thank you. Then the Market Towns Programme Investment Prospectus, the third tranche of project proposals. Are there any questions on that from anybody? Not seeing anything at the moment. Oh, Councillor Corney.
Yeah, no, it's not really so much of a question because I think the ship sailed, but I mean, you know, just how it sort of come about, it feels quite rushed now. You know, the amount of work that went into it in the first place. I know COVID's come along, but I'm not really sure how we drag a question out of that. But you know, it's like I say, I think the ship sailed, but more of a comment, I guess.
Right. Okay. Are you
I'm not really, like I say, I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm like I say, I'm not really sure. You know, the question would be, you know, really, I suppose the question would be, why is it? You know, why have we done this in such a rushed manner, considering the amount of work that went into it in the first place? But I think, like I say, the reason will be given COVID, won't it? You know, and you know, the fact that it's already happened, it's probably a bit of a hiding to nothing, isn't it? I guess.
Right. Okay. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
this is their third allocation of funds to different schemes, isn't it? So the program is already well underway in terms of allocating the funds. Okay. Thank you. Business Growth Service Growth Company Board. Oh, Councillor Scott. I'm sorry. Was this
no? It was just on Councillor Coney's point. You see, it does have implications, doesn't it, though? Because they're acting in this way in relation to this scheme, and as Councillor Coney said, the ship sailed. But isn't it something about process? And are they going to do this in the future, you see, just rush into something without any, without apparently perhaps proper planning, etc. I mean, it's just a thought following up from what Councillor Coney says as to whether something can be framed along the lines of, we at least trust that they'll act with greater, isn't it terrible? I'm hunting for words this morning for some reason, but just that they, they're rushed into this without proper foresight, perhaps. I don't know, perhaps there's nothing there, but it just came to mind as Councillor Coney was speaking.
Right, okay. I think Councillor Corney was intending not to progress that as a question, if I'm right. Yeah. Okay. Business Growth Service Growth Company Board. Are there any questions on that then? Not that I can see. Then there are recommendations from the Transport and Infrastructure Committee, the A16 Norwood improvements. Any questions on that from anyone? London Luton Airport's airspace stack consultation. Anything to ask on that? No. Greater Cambridge Partnership consultations, Waterbeach to Cambridge and Eastern Access. I was thinking about asking for clarification about the Mayor and the authority's view about Waterbeach to Cambridge, bearing in mind the coverage in the press recently with the suggestion that the Mayor was disfavouring other public transport routes, Waterbeach to Cambridge, on the assumption that people would be coming in on the existing rail line. And I just thought it might be worth us clarifying where the thinking is behind whether a second, an alternative public transport mechanism is desirable in that location. Does it make sense to ask that question?
Yes, Chair, I think it does, because a lot of those trains, by the time they arrive at Waterbeach, are already full. So how on earth are you going to get lots and lots of people into Cambridge? I really do not know.
No. And the Combined Authority has previously suggested that this is part of CAM, effectively, the connection up to Waterbeach. So is that no longer a thing, is kind of the question I was also wanting to ask on this. Councillor Miscanlon.
Yeah, I think it's imperative you don't have just one transport system between Waterbeach and Cambridge. You've got to have an alternative. As Granville just said, you can't rely on one. If one breaks down, what do? Everyone stand on the main road and thumb a lift? You can't do that. You've got to have an alternative system of getting people to and from the city from Waterbeach. I think it's imperative that you do so.
Okay, so we're happy to ask that question then. Okay, Community Land Trust's business case is a reference from the Housing Committee. Do we have any questions on that? Not that I can see. Local Growth Fund Programme Management Review from the Business Board. Anything on that? University of Peterborough Phase 2 incorporation of Property Company 2. Anything we want to ask on that? Not. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, on both university items, it's the same question. So it's about the hierarchy of transport. So in recent weeks, we've heard about 3 or 4 new multi-storey parking schemes announced in Peterborough. One was last Thursday, and it was news to many people that they plan 156 multi-storey car park space on the site. So the question is, the revelation of these plans and the concerns about encroachment on the green bank, the embankment green space, can we ask for them to review these plans? We were led to believe this would be a university that encouraged other forms of transport. We were told it wouldn't be about cars, but the multi-storey car park seems to push completely against that. So I suppose, Chair, for you, the question is, with revelations of this and other multi-storey car parks planned in the vicinity, can we ask them to review this to take on board the hierarchy of transport needs, i.e. to promote other forms of transport to the car? Does that make sense?
Okay. Does that, I'm not convinced the extent to which that relates to the incorporation of the PropCo.
Yeah, well, PropCo, it's pretty opaque as to who's building what. There's the new road as well. So if you put it in point 3 item, there's actually a plan in there that illustrates what may be built. So it's possibly better there.
In the PropCo development,
yeah,
in PropCo incorporation.
Councillor Coles may have more specific information on this one.
I've got Councillor Scott first and then Councillor Coles. So Councillor Scott.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Dupree. Just following up from Councillor Murphy, you see, is this project being carried out with any reference whatsoever to the Environmental Commission, that committee that's been set up and that we're meeting with, or perhaps we are or we aren't? Because you see, my position would be that if there's any building going on, then surely they should actually be referring it always or working in conjunction with their environmental project, because you know, if they're going to have zero emissions of carbon by X date, they're not going to have that if, on the other hand, there's all sorts of building going on that's encouraging car use and not alternative transport. So perhaps that could come into the question. Have they gone through their environmental body, commission, I think it's called? Thank you.
Right, okay, thank you. Councillor Coles.
Yes, thank you, Chair. An interesting point, I suppose. One line in one of the appendices goes on about 200 parking spaces on site. The Warina car park is the site which formerly had 693 car parking spaces. The argument might reasonably be put that actually there's no increase in car parking spaces, but I completely appreciate the position of both Councillor Scott and Councillor Murphy about how this fits in with the transport issue. I mean, for Peterborough, of course, we've also got the new proposals of a further multi-storey car park, but that's also going to be on one of the proposed new sites for the swimming pool, which is also on a car park. So we might be walking into something which is not necessarily going to be providing us with a very great level of information when we're building car parks that are smaller on car parks that are slightly larger at the moment. But completely appreciate the argument that we should be ensuring that the environmental pressures are considered.
Right. Okay. Are we content then? Oh, sorry. Yeah. I don't see any other speakers on this. So are we content to ask then a question which broadly is about the environmental and sustainability implications of the car parking proposals? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So we ask them for clarity on that. There's the other University of Peterborough report then on phase 2 manufacturing and materials research and development centre project. Is there anything on that? I'm not seeing anything. Okay, thank you. Local enterprise partnership partnering strategy. Anything we want to ask on that? I don't have anything, and I don't see anybody who does either. Okay, thank you, which takes us back then to the remit of the Transport and Infrastructure Committee. Have we given you enough time, Councillor Davey?
No, I could probably spend 3 days on trying to work out the right, but essentially the question would be something around the clarification of the decision-making structures in relation to the Transport Committee and the compliance with other bodies making similar decisions. It's trying to make sure it's not just about the GCP and it's broader than the GCP. I realise that's why I'm interested, but there may be other bodies that. So it's about 2-3 of Robert's report. So Robert's actually on the call, so he'll know the bit I'm referring to. It's about what's proposed in essence is that the mayor's going to the GCP, and yet the current proposals suggest that the GCP should come to the mayor to discuss the same thing. And that just doesn't make sense. So it's just about, sorry, rambling now. Clarify the decision-making structures, I think is what I'm asking.
So will the combined authority please clarify the decision-making structures that result from the proposal to change the remit of the committee?
Thank you, Chair. That would be ideal.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. That's all good. I think we're done with that item then. So we have a set of questions which I will put to the board on your behalf on Wednesday. Thank you all very much for that. The Combined Authorities Forward Plan is our next item. Now, the Combined Authority Board does not meet in February, so there are no meetings of the Combined Authority other than our own meeting at the end of February. I will be liaising with our lead members to look at the business of the committees that will be meeting in March, prior to our own meeting later on in March. So has anybody, Councillor Gehring wishes to say something on the forward plan?
Yeah, I think we put climate change on the agenda. I read in the media that the report of the climate committee might be delayed. Of course, in a way, it only makes sense once we have something tangible or a draft from the committee to hear the committee chair again. But maybe officers could shed some light on that, because if there is a draft, even a rough one, we could hear it in at the end of February and maybe provide input.
Right. I was going to come on in our own work program report item at item 11 to cover that, and we are told that the report will not have been published at a point at which it will be able to be included on our February agenda, and I'm therefore going to be suggesting that we put that into March and move some other March things around to accommodate that. But yes, it's an issue. I quite agree. Okay, thank you very much for that. So I don't think there's anything further to discuss on the forward plan unless anybody disagrees and wishes to raise something. Not seeing anyone. Okay, so then the next item is our lead members report. We have questions and answers from the executive committees that took place earlier this month. Transport and housing, we had no questions submitted to the skills committee. Are we happy to note those? I don't think there's much to add. We've already had a lot to say about housing this morning, and a clarification of the answer that was given at that time. Does anybody wish to raise anything further on that item? Not seeing so. No. Okay. Thank you very much indeed for that. And then our own work programme report. There are a number of things to update on this. The first thing to say is that as we've just been discussing, the report from the Commission on Climate Change will not be ready in time for us to look at that in February. So we might want, therefore, to move that into March. The second point is that the business case for the bus review has been delayed due to COVID. Everything's delayed due to COVID. So there won't be anything to update this committee on in February, which was going to be another item on our agenda, the bus review task and finish group response to the full business case. That won't be ready yet. So I'm also suggesting that we move that and that we ask Councillor Hay, as chair of our task and finish group, to liaise with our scrutiny officer and with officers working on the bus review to determine the best way forward, and whether that is for there to be another meeting of the bus review task and finish group, or to come to this committee or what. But are we content to leave that up to Councillor Hay to liaise with officers over? Yeah, and to move that from our agenda for the moment. The third thing I wanted to say is that we will have a report now to our February committee on the issue that we've been discussing about how we shadow the work of the business board. Councillor Murphy is our representative on that, and we will be receiving a report, having had some discussions in the meantime, which have included Councillor Murphy and looped him into this, as to how that is proposed to work. So we'll be asked to consider that in February. And the final thing I wanted to say, I think, before we look at what we can move out of February, out of March to cover all the things that we're moving into March, is that I noticed that the calendar for the combined authority actually shows the overview and scrutiny committee in March meeting after the board meets. The board would meet on the Wednesday and this committee would meet on the following Monday, which seems to make little sense. So I'm suggesting that instead of meeting on the 29th of March, as per the calendar, that we move that meeting to the 22nd, if members are in agreement with that. Are you content with that? Seems to me we can do our job in those circumstances rather better. So the question then is, what do we move out of March in order to accommodate the Climate Change Commission item and possibly a bus item? So I think probably the CAM Metro quarterly update is quite important and the project register update is useful. The one CAM SPV, I'm not sure about whether that's something we'd still want to have in March. We might want to put that off, or we might want to put off the University of Peterborough update for another month. Does anybody have any views on that? I see lots of hands, and it's possible that we could just come back with a proposal in February, but let's start with Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. Just recently attended the Peterborough Council's Children Education update. We had an update from John T. Hill about the university, and it has advanced somewhat. So I think it will be possibly quite useful to move that actually forward to February, because then he's in a position to discuss up to the 5 staged proposals of the university setup. So it will give us quite a good opportunity to see further ahead than we have so far.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that suggestion. I'll come back to that in a moment. Councillor Murphy. You're on mute, Councillor Murphy.
No, I've nothing else to add on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Miscandlin.
I think Andy is just present what I was going to say. Bearing in mind that he said that there is a lot more information, it would be better to bring forward a smaller amount of information than trying to overload it by moving it back a month. I would totally agree, move that to the February one. Move the university to the February update.
Thank you for that. Councillor Davey.
I was going to suggest or say that Anne and I are negotiating with the Lord Mayor to invite him to the Task and Finish group, but it sounds like from what other colleagues have said, we've created the space for him to come in March anyway. So it was just an offer as an other option.
All right, okay. So we're proposing then to ask for the University of Peterborough update to be moved to February because we believe there is sufficient information, fresh information available to make that a worthwhile time to have that item. Okay, that sounds useful. That clears us a little bit of space. I'm conscious that the March meeting will have also the forward plan of the board and the agenda for the March meeting of the board. So I don't want to overload it too much, but I think the Task and Finish group update, project register, and if possible, the one CAM SPV might be a good idea. So we'll work on the assumption that those are our March items and that the university is moved to Peterborough. Okay, sorry, to February. The University of Peterborough item is moved to February. Okay, thank you. We currently have a completely blank April calendar, so we'll need to address that, and I hope that we will bring some items to you for discussion in when we look at our work programme next month. We may by that stage all be knocking on doors and delivering leaflets for an election, or we may not, who knows? So we may not want a meeting in April anyway, but I'm working on the assumption that at the moment we do, except that Robert Parkin has kindly agreed to go and take some advice and come back to us about what we can discuss during what's called the PERDA period, the period on which local authorities' activities are to some extent restricted in an election period. So if it's an election period, that will be something we'll have to consider, and we will be taking advice from Robert Parkin on that. So thank you very much for that Robert. Councillor Gehring, your hand is up again.
Yeah, you just answered my question. I was asking whether the combined authority also will follow the PERDA rules that our constituent councils have, and if so, how the combined authority is going to handle that potentially new electric bikes, new scooters with the mayor's name on it are being introduced during PERDA. Can we have some assurances that the name of the current mayor will not appear on those vehicles or will not be introduced during PERDA?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure how we deal with it within the confines of this meeting, but I'm happy to make sure that that is followed up outside this meeting and that we obtain a response to that question. I suspect it's one for others than those of us who are on this call at the moment, but thank you for that. Okay, so with that, I think we've covered our work plan, and I think that leads me just to the final item, which is the date of the next meeting on the 22nd of February. So with that, we've landed spot on 1 o'clock. Thank you very much indeed to everybody, to members and to officers for your attendance and contribution this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well done.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.